Welcome, everyone, to the Religion Unplugged podcast, your one stop shop for all the best religious news and culture. I'm Religion Unplugged culture critic Joseph Holmes, and I'm here today with Mitch Hudson. Mitch is a writer and director who, with his wife Madison, co owns Big Dog Pictures. He has written and directed the feature film Summer Daydream and several award winning short films, including Got Your Back, earning recognition at festivals world nationwide. Since 2018, Mitch has served as assistant director on the hit series The Chosen, which you may have heard of, directing thousands of background actors in some of the most iconic biblical scenes ever captured on film. He is a showrunner behind the TV show The Promised Land, which is described as the Book of Exodus meets The Office. Mitch, welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, so uh, for someone who doesn't know what the Promised Land is, how would you describe it beyond that one elevator pitch? And where did you get the idea to do this?
Right. Yeah. So the Promised Land is, like you said, it's the Book of Exodus meets the Office. So we are basically telling the story of Moses and his family on their journey from Egypt to the Promised Land. But it's as if there's a documentary crew that's there with them, capturing what's happening in the moment. We get the occasional interview with Moses or Miriam or Aaron kind of off to the side, like that was crazy. We get kind of those little insights into their lives, and they talk directly to us for all of that. So it's like a documentary crew somehow was there with them during their journey. Yeah, and the idea was not mine. I was approached by one of our producers who had said, "Hey, do you think you could do Moses meets The Office? What do you think? Like just blank slate here, maybe a couple examples, but take a look. Do you think you can do it?" And I was like, "Yeah, let me check out the Bible and see where would be a great starting place for this, because obviously there's you think about the famous stories of Moses. And I think it was a little bit too complicated to start in on something huge like the Red Sea or the Golden Calf or the Ten Commandments, anything like that. And I was rereading Moses' story, and I found the story of when Jethro basically comes to Moses and is like, "Hey, you're not leading the people well. You have to lead by delegating and trusting others to lead too." And I was like, that's it. That's what our show is about. It's Moses and his family working together to try their best to lead the people and making lots of mistakes along the way. So, anyways, in a nutshell, that's where it came from. That's what our show is. That's what we're doing.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of those things where, again, I've been a Christian my whole life and watching a lot of Christian media, and I've been reviewing, faith-based media for a long time. And it's definitely one of those things that, you always kind of would like to see kind of a comedy take on some of these. A lot of times it's a lot of melodrama stories, and even whether that's taking place today or whether it's doing the Bible, the comedy is not something that you typically see as a way of telling these stories. And so
Right.
I guess my question is, why do you think that comedy is not something that is usually a lens that faith-based projects tend to go for? And did you think it was something that you wanted to do?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. So, I think comedy is all about perspective, right? And a
Mm,
lot of comedy that people kind of first think of, the perspective is usually the joke is on the subject matter, right? Like a lot of comedy is making fun of what it is about. Think about
right.
Monty Python, right? Monty Python and the Holy Grail. They're doing King Arthur, but the jokes are a little bit on the stories of that and how kind of silly they were, versus. And I think that's why a lot of people tend to have a lot of hesitation when it comes to incorporating comedy with the Bible, because you would never want the joke to be on the Bible. You don't want to make less of what we believe in or less of the Lord or anything like that. And so I think that's why comedy tends to really be a thing that when it's blended with faith, people are like, I don't know. I'm worried that if I watch this comedy, they're going to make me feel like I'm dumb for believing in what I believe in. I think that's why a lot of people have hesitation. But again, it all comes back to perspective. The perspective of our show is that the people in the Bible are people, and God used them even though they made lots of mistakes. And people are hilarious. People will do things that sometimes make no sense. People will do things that get them in trouble. And in the scripture we see all the time in Moses' story, he and his family are trying their best with many failures, but God is still using them. And so the perspective of our show is we are relating to these characters. We're not on the outside making fun of them. We're seeing how similar they are to us. And that to me was why I felt like this show really worked as a comedy, because I think through comedy, we end up seeing more of the humanity of someone than we would if it was just dramatic. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think that that's brilliant. That's always been my take on it. You brought up Monty Python and the Holy Grail, but what I've always really enjoyed, and this is people are going to hate me for saying this, some people, is I've always loved The Life of Brian.
Yeah.
And one of the things that the creators of that movie did noted is when they were trying to do a sequel to the Holy Grail, they
Mhm.
looked at the Bible and they said, okay, what can we make fun of here? And they realized
Right.
they couldn't make fun of Jesus because there wasn't anything to make fun of about him.
Right.
So they said, well, let's make fun of everybody around him who doesn't get him. And
Right.
of course, you see that all throughout the Bible as well. I mean, one of the funniest passages in the New Testament to me was Jesus says he tells his disciples plainly what's going to happen. And then after he
And they don't
does,
get it.
and then
Yeah.
afterwards it explicitly says, and then they turned to each other and asked each other what he meant by that.
Yeah. They're like, he can't have meant what he just said because that would be crazy. Yeah. It's so fun to read those
So
stories.
so I think that like you really hit it on the head. You're not making fun of God, you're not making fun of faith, but
Right.
you are poking fun at the people who are messing it up in the same way that romantic comedy is not making fun of love, but it is making
Right.
fun of people who don't
Who
know
are
how
in
to do
love.
love. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So that's
Yeah.
yeah, I really like this, and I think that's one of the things that you do well
Thank you.
in the show is making sure that focus. How did you try to do that focus? Because again, that is a balance where you that I see you kind of wrestle with in the show
Yeah.
is that okay, God and his word and his law is beautiful, and these
Right.
people are lovable and relatable and human, but also making fun of them and even poking fun at some of the kind of ways they're kind of wrestling with these rules and laws.
Right.
How did you, and you even do, again, you even do the golden calf story, which is a
Hmm.
very serious thing that happens.
Yeah.
How did you try to wrestle with that tension and balance?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. For me, the tone of the show has always and always will be in our show is it depends on what the characters are experiencing, right? It's very character led. You know what I mean? We are not inserting jokes just for the sake of making jokes. Most of the comedy is situational or it's relational. It's between the characters or they're up against an impossible task, and that's what makes it so funny, right? But the joke is never, again, it's never on them. It's usually with them or because we're like, yep, been there. You know what I mean? And so when you have moments in the scripture that are kind of unmistakably serious, right? Like when Moses comes back and finds everyone worshiping this golden calf, which is heartbreaking to Moses. In that moment in the show, when you see that part of that episode, we don't really have a lot of jokes there because again, they are not in a lighthearted mood. They're in a very heavy moment. And so I think we kind of track with how they're feeling. And it's only later, that we allow to us to get back into the comedic territory. But when they're hurting, we hurt with them. And that's always been kind of my rule, is it's like, okay, what is the moment where we need to just really be with them so that we can step back out and feel this? Because I think that's what's so good about to me, the best comedy shows are the ones where they're mostly funny, but then there's that feeling of heart, that feeling of connection to people that you're seeing on screen where it's like, I feel their pain, I sympathize with them, and I hope they get through it. And they do. And then it's funny again. You know what I mean? But I think for me, it's always been dependent on how they are doing in the moment. If that answers your question. And then the other one that I have is that's a very solid line is that the jokes are never about God. They're always just about the people. And so for me, tonally, God can stay holy in the show, and it's really just the people's response to him that can be funny.
How did you go about one of the things I've let me step back a moment. One of the things I like about all of these new shows that are coming out about the Bible, like The Chosen and like
Yeah.
The Promised Land, is that you're getting the chance to develop some of these biblical figures we know into characters.
Right.
How did you go about taking some of these people like, Moses, like Aaron and Miriam and Joshua, and making them characters
Yeah.
that could be in funny situations? What can
Yeah.
you give, like, take at least one or two of these and say how you made the decision to portray them the way you did?
Yeah, totally. Well, my favorite one to talk about for this is Miriam. So Miriam is such a key element of our story. And it's funny because Miriam is not talked about that much in the Bible, especially considering how significant of a character she was in Moses' story. I mean, Miriam saved Moses on the shore when she was a child. I mean, of course, God was using her to do that, but still, Miriam was the one watching over him, who connected to him with Pharaoh's daughter, and all of that. But we don't know much about Miriam, right? We know that she saved him as a baby. We know she was Moses' sister. We know that she was musical because it mentions that she led the women in singing songs at least once. And we know that later on she gets leprosy in Numbers because she confronts Moses. She has kind of a moment where she says, "Does the Lord speak only through Moses? Does he not also speak through me and Aaron?" Right? So we know a few things from that, right? We know Miriam was outspoken. We know she was musically talented. And we know she also maybe had a bit of a leadership streak within her as well, right? And she's a problem solver, right? She was, even as a kid, she defied her parents who were like, "We're going to leave this baby here." And she was like, "I'm going to watch over him." So I took all those aspects. I was like, okay, I want to make a character who is defiant, a leader, but is not really allowed to be a leader, musical, etc. And that's where kind of Miriam came from. And now we have this hilarious, almost deadpan character who's also very musically inclined, but wants to be a leader. And at the end of the pilot, Moses empowers her to be the leader of the women. And so through her, we get to see what leadership is like for the other half of the camp, which is all the women who are traveling with him, who are very rarely talked about in the Bible. We usually focus on the men. And through Miriam and Zipporah, we get to focus on the women, the other half of the society that they live in. But anyways, that's kind of, I took every nugget of information I had on Miriam and I was like, how do I stitch these together to make a character that's funny, but also, you kind of root for her a little bit too.
Cool. So, as our last question, that I'm going to shove two questions essentially into one,
Oh, great.
but what would you like to tackle if you do get to do more seasons of this show? And what are you most hoping that people get out of the experience of watching it?
Yeah, great question. So, I would love to honestly, the plan for the show is to do 40 episodes and a movie. That's kind of our trajectory for the show, right? You've seen the pilot is out, so we have 39 more to go, and we have five of them are coming out in October on YouTube. But I would love to go through honestly all of Moses' story, especially highlighting the stories that aren't necessarily interesting enough for the big movies. You know what I mean? Like, people, when they talk about Moses' story, they pretty much do Red Sea, Golden Calf, Ten Commandments. That's it. Maybe when he was a baby or when he was, fleeing Egypt, the burning bush, the beginning of his story, right? But we have all of Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. We have all these other stories where they went against King Sihon, King Og, where Miriam gets leprosy, where they get to the border and they send the spies in. All these stories that I've never seen before would be, I mean, I think I'd be thrilled to be able to tell all those stories, and really get to see a holistic approach to Moses's life and the lives of those who worked with him. And then when it comes to what I want people to take away from this story, I think, my main goal with the show is I want to make a really entertaining, interesting, funny show that is true to the scriptures and a great time to watch, a comfort show, if you will. I love for people to just put this on while they're doing their laundry, whatever. They have it on in the background like people do with shows like The Office and Parks and Rec. But if there's a deeper wish that I would have with the show, it's that people would see this and see these people who had genuine faith and did their best to follow the Lord and say, you know what? They're not perfect, but they really tried and they believed in something that was real. And I think I could do that too. That would be the deeper wish.
Well, awesome. This is great. And when is it coming out in October exactly?
October 1st. October 1st on YouTube, you can see episode two, and we will release new episodes every week after that throughout all of October.
Fantastic. Well, if this sounds good to you, definitely check that out. And thank you, everyone, so much. Thank you, Mitch, for joining us. And thank you, everyone,
Thank you,
for
man.
listening. Absolutely. And thank you for listening. This is the Religion Unplugged podcast, your one stop shop for all the best religious news and culture.